Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Michelle Cassandra Johnson. And she's here to share with us her new book, We Heal Together, Rituals and Practices for Building Community and Connection. Are you ready to reach out to others, be in conversation, and find ways to connect with compassion and openness? Well, today's show is just for you. I'm delighted to share that we have Michelle Cassandra Johnson here with us again today. Last time we spoke with her, we talked about her other book, Finding Refuge. And today I'm so excited that we get to spend this time talking with her about her new book, We Heal Together. So Michelle Cassandra Johnson is a social justice warrior, author, dismantling racism trainer, empath, yoga teacher and practitioner, and intuitive healer. With over 20 years of experience leading dismantling racism work and working with clients as a licensed clinical social worker, Michelle has a deep understanding of how trauma impacts the mind, body, spirit, and heart. She has led dismantling racism trainings with large corporations, small nonprofits, and community groups, including ACLU Washington, Duke University, Google, This American Life, the Center for Equity and Inclusion, and many more. So welcome to the show, Michelle Cassandra Johnson.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write this?
This is a great question because the answer continues to reveal itself to me. We Heal Together is my third book, and my first book is really Skill in Action, is about the yoga and wellness industry and radicalizing our yoga practices to create conditions for justice. And my second book, Finding Refuge, is about collective grief and having a spiritual practice to help us respond to grief. And I'm calling them into this space because they feel very connected to We Heal Together in their progression and my writing. We Heal Together is about how we come into community and the rituals and practices that we can engage with one another to create conditions for justice and liberation. And so the themes explored in it are different than my first book and more similar to Finding Refuge. But what inspired me is what happens when we recognize the world is not the way we thought it was, and there's some disruption. How do we tend that grief? That's Finding Refuge. And then how do we come into community? And I also feel like We Heal Together is very much connected to the past 3 years. We have been moving through a global pandemic and many other systems and forms of harm and oppression. And there is a lot of, in my experience, from my perspective, polarization and disconnection, and also this belief that we're separate when we're actually deeply connected. And so We Heal Together is offered in the spirit of helping us remember our interconnectedness, not only with humans, but with the planet as well. And finally, what inspired me is my grandmother, Dorothy. There's a chapter about her in We Heal Together, chapter 7. And I feel like she is infused throughout, and I feel like she invited me to be a channel and vessel to share story in this way, and We Heal Together. And I feel like she transitioned in 2017, and I feel like she has some medicine and wisdom to bring forth about this practice and process of remembering our interconnectedness. So I call her into this space because part of why We Heal Together came into being is because of Dorothy.
Oh my goodness, I just love that. I think that's so sweet to have that incorporated in such wisdom and guidance that's there, that is what they would call, I guess, evergreen. It doesn't matter what season we're in, we could always use that.
Absolutely.
Well, in your book, you talk about shared language. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's actually become a a section that's in every book. And shared language is a practice I learned when I became a dismantling racism trainer over 2 decades ago. We would spend quite a bit of time in those training sessions level setting and creating some shared understanding. And one way to create shared understanding is through shared language, so that I know what one means when they say something like system, or when they say something like trauma or spirit or privilege or healing. And this practice of creating shared language was so powerful in those dismantling racism spaces. And shared language became this place, an anchor we could go back to when there was some misunderstanding. Even if we had different perspectives and lived experiences, the shared language was like a way we could come into community together to better understand where we were, how we came to be, what problems we're facing, what systems we're trying to navigate. And so shared language is included in We Heal Together as well, as a way of saying, here's what I mean when I write about certain concepts. And it's not that people have to agree with the way I describe things like spirit or harm or healing. It's more for people to know. And the shared language sections in all of my books are at the beginning. It's kind of like, here is how I'm oriented. Here's how I'm coming into this book and this moment and this way of understanding what is going on and what is unfolding, and wanting to be really transparent about that. You know, often there's like a glossary at the end of books, and I feel like it's powerful to have this at the beginning of the book so people can see themselves in it or can surface questions in response to shared language. And again, it's this way of level setting and beginning the conversation. So people are ready as they read a chapter about communion and how we come into community together and what sacred space is, and they can understand, oh, this is what Michelle means when she says spirit, right? And what's my understanding of spirit, if someone would even use that language, right? Or when I talk about lineage and legacy, there's a chapter about lineage and legacy in We Heal Together. What do I mean when I say something like living ancestor or blood memories that we carry in our bodies? So the shared language is a tool for people to be with, to deepen their understanding of self and how they relate to the world, and also to bring into spaces, because We Heal Together is a book that I'm hoping will ripple out far and wide, and that people will actually engage the rituals and practices in circle with one another in many different ways, including introducing the shared language. That's a little bit about what it is and the importance of it, and the origin for me of where I learned about shared language.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share that with us. We really appreciate it. And it's interesting. It seems like during the pandemic, and even I think maybe even before that, a lot, even though we've had communities that have been somewhat coming together, I think so many people feel so disconnected as well. And being able to bring that together in a healing way, I mean, how powerful would that be?
Yeah, I agree with you that people, the way we had to orient, the way we had to reconfigure our lives in response to a global pandemic and uncertainty, right? I am almost 48. I had never experienced that level of uncertainty, and certainly not related to a global pandemic, because I had never lived through one. A global health pandemic is what I'll say. And of course, we know many people were isolated in ways that they didn't anticipate nor understand. And We Heal Together does feel like it feels very timely and like medicine to invite people back into community. I want to say, like, there were already polarizations and there was divisiveness and there was a at times sort of unwillingness for people who held different beliefs to talk, right? To share space, to bring our humanity, our shared humanity into spaces. And I feel like that's only amplified, intensified throughout time. And experiencing that plus having to be isolated from one another and mask if people did that, and just learning how to relate. And what I've noticed is the awkwardness of coming back into community, of smiling at people, of making eye contact, right? Of navigating spaces differently than I did when the pandemic first began, that there is this of sharing circle with people in person, right? Versus Zoom. I feel like there is this transition we're in with how do we relate to each other now, given the isolation we may have experienced individually and then collectively, right? That the isolation. And what comes to heart and mind is like, how do we trust each other in community again? How do we build bridges and relationship with one another in meaningful ways that can hold us as we continue to traverse whatever might emerge? And often I think about COVID, and I think about and I wrote about this in We Heal Together. While we are in a different place with it, as far as I understand, than we were in 2020, I feel like so much loss happened. It did. It's not a feeling. We lost a lot of people. And of course, this is on top of like climate chaos and on top of systems of oppression and harm and so many other things that are going on. And my hope is that with We Heal Together and coming back into community is that we can recover from some of what we have experienced instead of bypassing it, which might be the tendency if we want to get back to, I'm putting this in quotes, normal, whatever that means, right? That I don't know if we go back to the same place. And I do believe we have to make space to honor and acknowledge what we have moved through. Even if we relate to what we've moved through differently, that something happened to us that has changed us forever is how I have experienced COVID and community and relationship. So We Heal Together is certainly a call and a tool for us to come into space and recover and heal.
Is there a link between grieving and feeling free?
Yeah, there's a section, and it might be in the introduction. It is about grief and liberation. And earlier you asked how We Heal Together came into being. And something I didn't mention then that I will mention now is in 2019, I created a Healing and Community Summit. It was an online summit. I interviewed people from different backgrounds and perspectives, and people who were activists, people who are spiritual teachers, people who are authors, people from many different spaces. And I was asking them in that summit about collective grief. And then COVID happened, and then I interviewed more people, which I had not planned to do. But I was like, oh, wait, now we're in this time where we're really talking about grief and liberation and collective grief and how we create conditions for freedom for all. And We Heal Together feels like an extension of that online summit and those conversations. And it really deepened my that experience of interviewing people and talking about grief and liberation, deepened my understanding of the link between the two, and how I think about them and have written about grief and liberation and it's related to recovery and not bypassing what we've been through, is that in my experience of grief and responding to loss, not only personal loss, but the loss that we are experiencing on the planet at this time in many different ways. In my experience, I have been shaped and conditioned to grieve for a certain amount of time and then to be over it. I have been shaped to believe that grief is linear when it is not, in my experience. Grief feels like an ongoing process, not a state of being, but an ongoing process. And when I resist grieving and making space to grieve, often stagnation occurs physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, right? There's a heaviness that I am moving with, that I'm holding. And sometimes actually things will come out sideways in communication because what is on the surface for me is grief, but I'm not calling it that and I'm not attending to it. When I do make space to attend to my grief and do that individually and also in community with others, what I've experienced is a release and more freedom in my body. And this relates to something I've written about in We Heal Together. My spiritual practice is mainly based in yoga, and many of the offerings that I teach are from ancient yogic texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras, and from several other teachers and texts. And in yoga and many other spiritual teachings, there is this a belief that our systems want to move into balance, and that there are things in the way and reasons why we suffer that create barriers to our liberation and freedom and our state of oneness. And in my experience, when I allow the release, when I make space to grieve, when I attend to my heart and my heartbreak, there is this process I move through where I'm able to feel more liberated in my body, where my spirit feels more liberated, and where there's an attempt to move back into a state of harmony or balance, or whatever word people might use to describe that oneness, that interconnectedness, the awareness that I am connected to all that is now, that has been and will be. And so grief and liberation feel so connected to me. And finally, what I'll say about this is that so much of what I feel like we are losing and responding to and grieving, it's not only personal, it is systemic. And I named and shared about how I've been shaped to grieve for a short amount of time. And then I think about how that's been institutionalized. If we lose someone, we have a limited amount of time to actually process and take time off work, for example, right? Or culturally, there is this idea that, strength is equated with not grieving. All the while, systems are creating conditions that cause grief for us and that are in the way of us being free. So the other way that I think about grief and liberation is what are we grieving and why, in response to systems, in response to institutions, in response to the multiple ways we are perhaps out of alignment with our oneness and with the truth of who we are.
Our society has such a difficult time with grief and dying, and being able to give this topic an appropriate amount of space, and for us to be able to work through grief when we're going through this process. Do people tend to bottle everything up and then find themselves dealing with compounded grief, maybe grief they haven't dealt with an entire lifetime, when they finally are ready to deal with it?
Yeah, I want to say that I think yes to what you said. And I was speaking about it in my conditioning and shaping, and you said in this culture, right? And I do feel like there is, many of us perhaps have been discouraged from grieving out loud, grieving in community, grieving in ceremony, and more often what I've seen is people grieving in private or not grieving at all. And that's why I mentioned stagnation, that I think, what happens when we don't attend to what needs attention, right? And if we're on some level experiencing cultural trauma, which I believe we are, even if we're experiencing it differently, there's a collective experience of it and a way our collective consciousness is being shifted. There's this way that I experience people holding things very close because of a fear of, if they acknowledge their heartbreak, for example, that the floodgates will open and they will not be able to be contained or put themselves back together. And often how I relate to this is that, things are falling apart all of the time. And there are things I can point to that are falling apart right now. And I bet if I asked, 10 people, they would point to things that are falling apart. And so when we resist the truth of that, things are crumbling, things are being dismantled, things are falling apart. There are dysfunctions that exist on a collective scale. I think there's more space actually that's then created for us to reckon with the dysfunction, the things that are falling apart. But we're encouraged to contain our emotions, not just grief, but really any emotions that are regarded as negative, which they're just feelings, right? So if we're angry, some of this depends on our identities, but if we're if we're angry or if we're sad or if we're grieving something, that we do that privately, that we only express joy and happiness. And I love gratitude and joy and happiness. And yet there's something else happening in my human experience. And I want to actually be fully alive, which means I need to feel the grief or the sadness or the heartbreak or the dissonance or confusion, as well as the joy and happiness and ease that I experience at different points in my life. I wonder what it would be like to thinking about your question around this, like this, people balled up. I think about that as people are trying to hold on because there's a fear of what happens when we let go. And I am really curious about what would happen if we actually let go in a way that's held. I don't mean like we just do it and we're not held and we're not in community and we're not holding one another, but to allow some of the what needs to move out of our system to move out, because there's a cost to us when we try to contain everything. And in my experience, it just doesn't work. So that's what I would offer in response to your question.
Thank you. What is a way that we can cultivate community?
Well, in We Heal Together, I had written it, and I had written practices after each chapter. And the practices were intended to be done in community. And then I sent it to my editor at Shambhala, and she encouraged me to write practices for people who are interested in finding community, people who may not actually want to be in a group, but may want to share a practice with one other person. And then the original practices I had written, which were all meant to be done in circle with people in some way. And I love this because I feel like what it did for We Heal Together is it offered different access points for people who may be new to rituals, who may be new to spiritual practice, who may want to practice on their own and cultivate a deep practice before reaching out and practicing with others. And so there are many ways that we can create community. And there is, chapter 1 is about, at the end, the practice is about our web and who we're in communion with. And not just humans, but, the natural world too, and our supports. And for me, my ancestors are energies I commune with. There are deities I commune with. I commune with the oak tree in my backyard. And then, of course, there are people in my life I commune with. And I began that way in chapter 1 with this practice at the end of it, because I wanted to broaden how people think about community. I think often people think about community as how I relate to other people, and it means coming into space with other people. And yet I feel like there's so many other ways that we can be in community. And so many other beings we can be in community with if we choose, and the natural world is one of those. I think that, if we think about how we build community, and if we, think about the purpose of community, the way that I think about it is, and I'm in different communities. So I have a circle that I meet with once a month of women who come to my house, and we sit in circle and we gather and we eat food and we laugh and we pull cards from different tarot decks and we journal and we build fires and we create abundance jars and we share gratitudes and we witness each other when there's an experience of loss or something to celebrate. That community is different than my community of colleagues who do racial equity work, for example. We do sit in circle in that same way, but often the purpose of that is a bit different, right? It might be a learning space. That's a different kind of community. Communing with family is different than a learning space, or different than that circle I just mentioned. So I want to invite people to think about not only like, who are we communing with, but there are different communities. And I name this because the way we come into community may be different, but there are some central themes in that circle that I mentioned, in family, and in the group of racial equity trainers I am a part of and work with. We have to take time to build some trust with one another. And trust doesn't happen in one session, right? It takes time, it takes learning. And I also think these containers, the spaces I mentioned, these communities, that one thing that's very useful is flexibility in that space, is people positioning themselves as learners, is people practicing deep listening. And in certain spaces in community, it makes sense to create some, like, how do we want to care for each other in this community, and be very explicit about it. And so that's there are some other things to consider, like, being an open vessel in this space, allowing spirit to move through the space, allowing yourself to be moved in community. When I say community, I'm really thinking about connection and how we come into connection with one another, and what is essential, what needs to be in place for that to happen. And sometimes it happens very organically, and other times there's more work and attention that we need to put into it, and intention we need to put into it to create community that's sustainable.
Your book really does invite the reader and our listeners to look at community in a different way, which I applaud you. I think it's interesting because we get so wrapped up into whatever little communities we do have. Exploring beyond those a lot of times isn't something that people will do. And you're right, we have to develop this level of trust and working together, but I think it happens in all areas.
Yeah, I would agree. It does happen in many different areas, in many different ways. And that's why I mentioned sometimes it's like, organic, right? And I'm building community with one person, and sometimes it's a group meeting, and we actually have to take the time to figure out, how do we respond after harm happens, right? How do we create conditions for repair? And what you just named is making me think about what I've shared about interconnectedness. The way I commune is with beings is different when I remember I'm connected to them, right? When I remember there's this deep interdependence and interconnectedness, that I'm part of an ecosystem. When I forget that, I'm not in my humanness as much, meaning I'm not centering our shared humanity as much. And sometimes I forget. And it feels like a transactional communication. It doesn't feel like I'm seeing the person, right? Or seeing whatever being might be in the natural world. But when I remember that oneness, that connection to all things, that actually invites me into community in a different way. And so I think that's a way to frame how people might orient to the world and be able to deepen their connection with community, that we are in fact so interdependent on each other. And if things like COVID did not highlight that for people, I'm kind of like, I don't know what will, right? Even if there's a conditioned tendency to be like, I meet with these people, I don't talk to these people. I understand that, but that's a conditioned tendency. We actually can do something or create ways of being that are outside of our conditioning and outside of our tendencies and outside of our shaping, which We Heal Together is certainly a call for that.
Well, it's not necessarily healthy for everyone to live on a shack in the mountains and not communicate with anybody.
Right.
Usually we have to have that community that brings us together. And I was just so impressed with your work and how you talk about this interconnectedness. And it kind of has me thinking. In your book, you talk about heaviness and joy and how they can exist at the same time. And I love how you bring these what people would think contradictory thoughts together to build upon something much stronger. I'd love to hear your discussion on that.
Yeah, thank you. I love the chapter on joy and wonder, and it is about joy and heaviness in this world, and it's also about how serious I was as a child, and still can be quite serious in response to what is happening in the world. It speaks to what I named about the sort of collective experience of trauma and what it is to be a human on the planet at this time. And I believe joy is our birthright. And people may use other words like ease, like happiness, like liberation. These aren't all the same things. But in this chapter, I explore my own process of learning how to connect with joy more deeply as my birthright, and remembering that when I'm in a state of, or a space of joy, which may be fleeting, right? Or I experience something that is joyful, because many things are temporary, that it's okay to feel joyful. And the heaviness for me is really about, as I said, what it means to be alive at this time. And Am I allowed, right, to feel joy? Also, with my identities that I embody, and living in a culture that has both told me I am not enough, right? Or based on race, I'm a Black woman, right? I'm not enough, based on race and gender. I'm not capable. I'm not competent. All of these messages that steals joy away from me, coupled with I'm just reeling from what is happening on our planet and what we are doing to each other and what we are doing to the planet. Myself included, I'm not separating myself from these patterns of behavior of like extracting and mining and disconnecting, right? I'm constantly unlearning and trying to learn or learn new ways or remember actually very old ways. And so this attunement to the heaviness in the world at times has made me question and the messages that I actually should feel something other than joy, and I'm not allowed to feel joy, has made me question: Can I feel good in this moment, right? And what about all the people who are not, right, feeling good at this time? And it really, that chapter is this journey of like, it's just joy and wonder, of curiosity, of the experience of allowing oneself to feel joy while we reckon with what is in the way of us all feeling free, of us all remembering that interconnectedness that we've spoken about in our time together. And there's a story in that chapter about someone like I don't remember the exact events that were happening when I was leading this workshop, but I was online leading a workshop, and it was about mindfulness in the workplace, and so many things were happening in the political and cultural context. And someone asked me about like, how can we be mindful if all of these things are happening? And I really I responded to him, and I also reflected on this question because it brought that tension of like, there is so much heaviness in the world. And maybe for individuals, like in their spirits, there may be heaviness too, based on what's happening in their lives and then how they're responding to what's happening on a collective scale. And I do know part of my response to this person was we can't take care of everything. We just can't. It's not humanly possible. I wish we would. I wish we had our magic wands and we could actually dismantle all of the things that are in the way of us being free. And yet I'm one human and I can't do that. And even if there were 10 of us, we wouldn't be able to today disrupt everything that needs to be disrupted, or dismantle everything that needs to be dismantled, or remember everything that needs to be remembered at this time to help us heal, right? We can only do a piece of that, which is not satisfying to someone like me. And I don't think it was satisfying to the person who was like, how can you be talking about mindfulness and breathing when the world's falling apart? And this feels connected to joy. Like, how can I feel joy when the world is falling apart in many ways? And I don't want systems to steal my joy, right? I don't want, I want to, and this is at the end of We Heal Together, like I want a deep belly laugh with my friends around the table I was describing, right? Who come here and we're in community. I want that because that feels like balm and medicine in response to what is going on. And if I want to continue to show up and respond to the heaviness, I need some joy, right? I need to be in that place of wonder and awe and curiosity. So that's what I'll offer about joy and heaviness.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Michelle Cassandra Johnson in regards to her new book, We Heal Together. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
The first thing you need to know about me is that I love my kids, but they are not my everything. They used to be, but that's when my entire life fell apart. In order to pick back up the pieces, I had to put the love I have for myself before everything else, including my kids. I'm Jessica Dennehy, and I own multiple businesses. I'm a best-selling author, and I have all the strategies that I've used to make my life what it is today. And I'm going to teach you how to do them in my new book, Selfish is a Superpower. So go get your copy today on Barnes & Noble or jessicadennehy.com.
Announcing a revolutionary tool for wellness. Scalar Light has the ability to enhance and harmonize your own bioenergies. With Scalar Light, you can get started in just minutes and begin feeling better the very next day. Scalar Light is a remote energy that gently and subtly works with your own body's bioenergies, increases pro-cellular wellness, and enhances your body's immunity.
Experience the benefits of Scalar Light. Try a complimentary 15-day experience at scalarlight.com.
In your hands lie ancestral patterns. These patterns shape how you think, what you struggle with, and experiences you love, your life pattern. We're going into the latest neuroscience of biological hand analysis, a realm beyond palmistry where science and the soul entwine. Hand analysis is the latest method to transform lifelong patterns. I am Master Hand Analyst Brent Bruning. Join us and visit thepowerinyourhands.com.
Looking for a page-turner? Cozy up to a fantasy adventure romance trilogy with The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper by Mary Kay Savarese. The second novel in the Star Writers trilogy, The Star Writers Club, is coming soon. Take the journey. Connect with Mary at www.maryksavarese.com. Her books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores.
The book Terminal Cancer is a Misdiagnosis, authored by Danny Carroll, is on sale at Amazon now. Licensed psychologist and psychotherapist Tessa Antiojon-Guerra commented, "This is one of the most empowering books on the topic of cancer you will ever read." Award-winning author T.L. Needham commented, "This recommended book can be understood by anyone seeking answers, hope, and alternatives to a terminal diagnosis. Buy it now on Amazon.com.
With Breath Hub, you'll experience the transformative power of breath as it harmonizes your body, mind, and spirit. Recommended by experts in fitness, sports, psychology, and medicine. Meet the scientific way of being well. Breath Hub. Breathe better, live better.
Pandemonium. Fast forward 20 years. A U.S. president seizes control of all U.S. missiles, the power grid, the banking system, and every computer in America as he hides in an underground bunker. Pandemonium, a captivating sci-fi thriller where a hidden war, psychics, aliens, artificial intelligence, and transcendental love collide with the latest media technology. Pandemonium, live to all devices. Get your copy on paperback or digital. Free sample at getpsychic.org.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Michelle Cassandra Johnson, in regards to her new book, We Heal Together, Rituals and Practices for Building Community and Connection. Before we left for break, we were talking about this interconnectedness that we all have and how this moves beyond us and our connection with one another, but also to the planet and to our environment at large.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And part of this deep connection to all things in the natural world, I think my relationship with the natural world shifted and it deepened for sure. And some of this is in my second book, Finding Refuge. It deepened when I experienced loss that was connected to the collective in a way that I had not before. And I started to, the only place that felt expansive enough for me at the time was the natural world, and a specific mountain I would go visit all of the time in North Carolina. And it's where the world didn't feel like narrowed, right? It felt so expansive and broad. And then I started noticing, I think I'd already been in a relationship with an attunement to those cycles of nature for sure, and curious about them, and in a place of wonder and awe by beings in the natural world. But this period of deep grief, being met with the expansiveness of the natural world, was deeply healing for my heart. And I feel like the natural world helped me mend my heartbreak in so many ways. And witnessing the cycles in nature and how resilient nature is, and what a teacher it is in so many different ways, like watching the spider weave her web, or I have honeybees, watching them, which is a whole thing that I've written about in Finding Refuge and in We Heal Together. There's an entire chapter about honeybees and alchemy and magic. I sit with them every day, right? Or watching the flowers bloom in North Carolina, and the pollinators come, right? Or the clouds go by, or the ravine in the back of my yard. Like, this feels so, watching nature relate, right? The beings relate to one another, because I believe they understand they're part of an ecosystem in a way that humans don't always remember. We're like in deep relationship with all of the beings I just named. And so I feel like this heartbreak, the natural world being medicinal in its response to my heartbreak and mending, and then my curiosity and wonder and awe at what nature does all of the time, and the awareness that I am nature, it deepened my awareness of my interconnectedness to all things, coupled with my spiritual practice. And I would say, like, sitting on top of a mountain is a spiritual practice, right? Looking at the sun is a spiritual practice. Watching the clouds go by, spiritual practice. Watching the honeybees, spiritual practice. Right? Watching the flower open. So all of these things are deep practices that can bring us into that vibration, that oneness, that connection.
In your book, you talk about dream work. So how does that interweave with all of this?
I love this question because I love that chapter 7, dream work, which I mentioned is there's a story about my grandmother, Dorothy. And she came to me in a dream, and she asked me to make an offering. She didn't use words, but she asked me to make an offering to an oak tree in my backyard. That is a tree she never saw when she was in this earthly realm, but a tree that feels very deeply connected to her, and in fact influenced the cover of We Heal Together, and the oak leaves and the acorns and the tree rings. And there's this chapter is about this offering she asked me to make, and more than that, it is about, and I think this is what she was communicating, it is about dreaming our way into a future where some of the things we've named here, where we're all free, where we have what we need, where we are in deep relationship with one another, where we remember, right, that we belong to each other. I think that's what she was communicating to me in this dream, through this form of Michelle through ritual, offer something to this oak tree. And yesterday I led a dream practice with a group based on the practice that is in this chapter. And they were asking questions about, are we talking about like dream work, like I have a dream like MLK spoke about? Are we talking about dream work during dream time that we bring into our waking life? And in chapter 7, I do talk about dream time and what happens when we are able to go into REM sleep and dream and problem solve and come up with divine solutions, right, to respond to what's going on. And then the connection of what happens during dream time when we sleep and bringing that into our waking life. And when people ask this question about, are we talking about dreaming, the way that people, teachers and leaders and people have inspired us on this collective scale, the way they talk about dreaming our way into the future and visioning and a collective vision for freedom. Are we talking about that, right? These aspirational dreams? Are we talking about dream time? I was like, we're talking about both, right? Because there is a link between the two. And for example, what did MLK know, right? When he was speaking, I have a dream. What did he understand about what was happening and what was going to happen when he visioned that in community with others and spoke that, and spoke it in a way that, I mean, rippled out, right? And continues to inspire people. And what did that dream I had about my grandmother that called me into a practice of reciprocity, called me into connection with ancestors, called me into researching dream lodges and dream temples, which I had not planned to do for this chapter. I didn't really even know anything about them, right? Or the dreaming that I mentioned, honeybees, the dreaming that happens when we are able to work between realms as they are in this earthly realm, and to be curious about what else is happening, right? They can transition between realms and communicate. And so this dreaming is in response to what else do we have to do, right? And it is to get out of the conditions that are in place and the constraints that have been put into place by systems that actually are not about our freedom or liberation. And it is also to pay homage to people who understood there's something that exists beyond the conditions that are in place that create barriers to our liberation. And we have to dream outside of these conditions and constraints. And people created these systems, right? And so what could we create when we actually dream collectively, when we dream together, when we actually prioritize collective care, when we think about future generations, and how we are leaving this planet to future generations, human and non-human, right? What could we create? And so it's dreaming that may sound mystical to people, and it is, and also it's quite practical because it's taking what we dream up and then putting that into action is what I would offer. That's why there's a link in this chapter between dream time and waking life, and bringing what we dream up in community together into waking life for the collective good.
Is there a yoga practice that can bring us together in group for dreaming purposes?
Yes. So the practice in chapter 7 is a yoga nidra practice. And yoga nidra is, for those who may be unfamiliar, is a deep rest practice. It can feel like you're in the space between being fully awake and completely asleep. So there often people are aware and listening to the guidance that a teacher might be sharing with them as they guide a yoga nidra. And there are many different ways to move through yoga nidra. And it is to be in that liminal space, right? That transitory space, similar to in REM sleep, we can come up with solutions and problem solve, right? And that kind of deep sleep as we're dreaming. And in yoga nidra, in this liminal space, things can come through that we may not be able to access when we're fully awake, right? And our mind is moving, right? And we're intellectualizing things, that it's this way we still the mind enough to move it out of the way to see what would like to come forth from our spirit. And from ancestors and from this liminal space, this between space is what I would say. And it often yoga nidra includes creating some sort of sankalpa, which is an intention in the present tense. And the sankalpa in this chapter is centered around my grandmother's call for reciprocity and what we've been talking about around collective liberation. However, people would frame that we're not creating a sankalpa just for ourselves, but we're thinking about the collective and what we want to vision and see and create in the world. And yoga nidra also includes, some of the time includes what can feel like a body scan, although that's not what it is. It's just bringing different parts, bringing attention to different parts of the body to help settle and soften and relax the body. And in this yoga nidra practice in chapter 7, there is also a calling in of certain experiences and elements like a sunset, a sunrise, together, collective, healing, thrive, all of these different words to allow people's consciousness to to connect with what comes into my awareness as I think about a sunset or sunrise, right? Or as I think about liberation, or as I think about the river or a hawk, or us being part of a collective. So yoga nidra can take on many different forms. Sometimes it's a deep relaxation of sankalpa and calling in benevolent beings. And it is said that often people who actually have trouble sleeping will practice yoga nidra, because 20 minutes of yoga nidra can be equated to 4 hours of restful sleep. If we allow ourselves to go into that liminal space. And as I said, to allow what wants to come forth from our spirit, right? What wants to move through. It's a way of being spirit led and spirit forward. So that's the practice that I would invite people to move into, or any practice that allows you to be in a more liminal space, not in a my mind and thought patterns work this way, but what's happening below the neck, and not just in the mind, right? What else is happening in the body with your prana, your life force, your energy, and what is flowing through you?
So many of us come from such a dysfunctional place in life in one way or another. So is it important for us to work on healing ourselves, or do we just come into community to heal because everyone's kind of going through some of the same things? What would you say would be a good way to approach that?
Yeah, thank you for this question. What I will offer is that even when I have been in a place of believing that I am healing on my own, that's actually never been true. Even when I have reached out to a counselor, a therapist, I have a support who's responding to me and aiding me in my healing. Even when I'm just sitting in front of my altar and meditating, I have an ancestor altar. I have an altar with many different things on it, candlelight and feathers that I found, and deities, and special objects, right? And flowers. I'm in communion with all of those things and inviting and healing with the aid of my supports. And so in my experience, we're not in isolation when we heal, even if we feel like we are. That's just not been my experience as I sat with it and thought about it more. And I do believe that there are things that I need to heal from ancestrally, and also just because of my shaping and conditioning that may be similar to other people, but it may be very specific to the trauma I've moved through and experienced in my life. And so I want to uplift that I need to do my work to heal myself, and the patterns that create suffering for me, which it's likely they create suffering for others too if I'm suffering, right? And the trauma I've been through, again, that may be specific to me, but I think there are ways it would resonate with other people. There may be specific practices like meditating every day, like getting out in the natural world, or going to sit with my honeybees and to watch them, right? There may be things I need to do, or journaling or counseling that I need to do. And I feel like the power for us to heal when we're in community, and this has been my experience together, it supports me in healing myself, right? So there's a relationship between the two. So there's the point of are we really healing on our own, even when we believe we are? And how can we amplify our healing in community and the healing of that community when we come together?
Are there ways for us to connect with compassion and openness that help us heal?
Yeah. We're talking about We Heal Together, and I've mentioned Finding Refuge, which is the subtitle is Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief. And I'm calling it in because as I think about the heart, I think about compassion. And I mentioned a few things like listening and being an open vessel, and the willingness, which I've written about, to be moved, which feels like heart work to me, to be moved, right? To feel like I don't know everything. I'm coming into this space. I feel like so much of what ails us is a disconnection from the heart and our humanity. And I feel like part of what will heal us is getting back to the heart and actionable compassion. And I say it this way because I am a compassionate being, And my compassion needs to be connected for me to the collective good, and it needs to be of service to something bigger than me. I don't really know how to operate a different way. And what I'll say is my mother taught me about compassion in that way, to be of service, right? To be in deep relationship with others, to answer the question for the sake of what, right? Not just you, Michelle, right? This is what she would say, but what is bigger than you? To be led by ancestors in spirit. And so this is the kind of actionable compassion I feel like we need to remember and need to practice. It isn't just about me generating compassion through my own individual metta or loving kindness practice. It's an important practice, and it will ripple out. But for me, it needs to be tied to, for what, right? Why? What is the why behind what you are doing? As my friend Stephanie Goes to Mall would say, what is the purpose? What is the why? What is the reason? And for me, that always needs to be something bigger. And so I would invite people into that heart work, that deepening of compassion, the capacity to empathize, right? The willingness to connect, even if we don't fully understand someone else's experience, the willingness to listen to them, and the willingness to take action based on our social location, which is in the shared language of We Heal Together, the identities that we embody, right? This willingness to not just say I value someone or I value the planet, but what are the actions then that I will take in my life from my compassionate heart that align with my values?
Well, Michelle, it's been such a joy to spend this time with you. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Thank you so much, Marianne, for inviting me to be on the show and connecting with me and asking such thoughtful questions. People can connect with me through my website, which is michellecjohnson.com. Once people visit the website, there's an opportunity for folks to sign up for my newsletter, a bi-monthly newsletter. And that the newsletter includes all of my offerings, and offerings are updated on my website weekly because I keep evolving and offering different things. So that's a great way to stay in contact with me. There's also the opportunity for someone to email me through the website if there are follow-up questions or ways people want to be in community with me. And then I'm on social media, Instagram more than Facebook, but on Instagram, Skill and Action is my handle, so people can follow me there. I post many different things on there about events, about musings, about my dog Jasper, the honeybees and the chickens I have in my garden. So that it's a way people can connect with me and perhaps get to know me a little better, as well as through my books, which are all listed on the website.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, We Heal Together: Rituals and Practices for Building Community and Connection. Both Michelle's books, We Heal Together and Finding Refuge, is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Remember, support our indie bookstores. You can purchase this book directly from the publisher at Shambhala at shambhala.com. Make sure to visit Michelle's website at michellecjohnson.com to be part of her community, learn more about these great books, and find out about her upcoming events. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever.
Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.